Yeah.
Yeah, so it's basically the prime mover argument.
You could call it that.
Yeah, yeah. So imagine that you're speaking to a child.
Oh, okay. I could say, Johnny, are you dependent for your existence? Did you happen? Were you born? He says yes. And I said, oh, well then, Johnny, God exists.
Hello, fellow YouTubers. This is Karen S. After sifting through several of Trey Jadlow's online discussions, in my attempt to outline or break down his argument, I had sort of an epiphany concerning the core of it when I and others, especially Jim Gardner, noticed he would continually try to put words in the mouths of his opponents. Most of the time it was the expression acted upon or acted on, followed by an insistence they were violating the law of non-contradiction, i.e. they were logically incoherent.
So you're saying he doesn't change?
No, he does not change in such a way that he is acted upon to go through metamorphosis.
No. He...
Ipse dixit translates to he himself said it. This fallacy, an appeal to one's own authority, is used to deny issues of any discussion as even debatable. I had used the words self-defined in commentary describing Trey's method of argument before I came across ipse dixit, which I had used before when blogging about Jason Peterson's Clarkian presuppositionalism. I never saw it used a lot as a fallacy and must confess I didn't fully understand it. But Trey is now its poster child. A lot of people who he has been in hangouts with have told him his argument is very difficult to understand, as in this video calling it gobbledygook, as he often uses a lot of philosophical jargon. I'm going to try to explain everything and keep everything in layman's terms in this video, so please make a comment if it's still hard to understand. Trey's argument consists of a set of what may be called self-defined truths, propositions for which he is the only authority, which he uses to deny any objection as debatable. It begins with his own definitions, which are then intertwined with the standard definition of the law of non-contradiction, that two contradictory statements cannot both be true at the same time in the same context. He then uses this to control the narrative by forming false dichotomies, using his own predefined attributes of his God, which he insists must necessarily exist. I'll state this in a different way. The law of non-contradiction does not hold for any disagreement to his conclusion, according to Trey. Here's Trey kind of saying it himself.
Causality is just the law of non-contradiction in application.
So let's examine his argument a little closer and how it should be responded to. Trey has furnished this syllogism, which is from a hangout he had with Dave S., to explain his argument. Premise 1, contingency exists. Premise 2, contingency requires aseity. Conclusion, therefore, aseity exists. He also proposes two presuppositions. One, the general reliability of sense perception, and the other, the validity of the law of non-contradiction.
Well, let me say this. My only two main presuppositions are going to be the law of non-contradiction, rational coherence, and then secondly, it's going to be the basic reliability of sense perception.
The law of non-contradiction will come into play, as I've already noted, as a method of countering his opponent's objections. So, if we think of contingency and self-existence, or the universe and God, as two sets of objects, as an apologist, Trey would want more than one object in the aseity or God set in order to show that it wasn't just a synonym for his God. So we need to ask him the question if this self-existent entity can only be his God. We will find as I proceed that this is his intent, as well as in his asserting the necessary attributes he claims this entity must have. If it is the case that it can only be as God, then he has shown this syllogism is only begging the question, since this self-existent being is only a mask for his God as the first cause. If he says no, then as we move on to the heart of his argument, which he claims is a solution to the infinite regress of cause and effect, we can say this is evidence that we can discuss other possibilities for first causes. Trey claims his argument is scientific.
All right, you got induction through sensory perception. You've got deduction with the mind. That's what the scientific method is. That's why I say this argument is a scientific argument, because it basically uses the senses and uses logical deduction, which are the two halves of the scientific method, and they come to the conclusion that God exists.
But is it? Scientific arguments or hypotheses are usually provisional and tentative, while Trey's argument is definitional and final. As science can only deal with the natural world, Trey also avoids the use of the word supernatural and even claims his God exists in the universe, not beyond, although it is a realm that is timeless, spaceless, and non-corporeal or immaterial. It is difficult to see how his God would not be supernatural if it possesses all the attributes and powers he claims, particularly that of omnipotence.
Show how self-existence necessitates omnipotence.
Well, think about it. If something exists and something else acts upon it, then it is subject to that which is bringing the action, is it not? The realm in which self-existence resides is not a realm of happening. Okay, it's not something, and it's not something that can be communicated. It's eternal, and eternality or pure being cannot be communicated. Do you agree? Go ahead.
In your view, the reality or the what we experience temporarily, is that somehow contained within this self-existent realm? Is it like another shell?
Well,
on the outside?
it's not so much a place as it is a being, because material is necessarily contingent. It cannot be omnipresent. So that which we're talking about as being self-existent cannot have a body, because it cannot be confined, like material or corporeality can be contained. So that which is self-existent is immaterial, and so when we're talking about realms, if you will, it's not so much a place like a material place we're thinking of, but rather it's an ontological relationship. So it's kind of.
Would you say self-existent or whatever that is absent of physical attributes?
Essentially, yes, it has to be, because the physicality is limited by space.
Okay.
This gets us to the largest problem with it being scientific. Since his God is an immaterial being, Trey's words, and he claims it created everything else in the universe ex nihilo, from nothing, how would his God and everything else, as part of the data, be tested to support a scientific argument that the first cause was his God, as Trey proposes? In other words, how would we falsify it? We can't test for his invisible, immaterial God, and everything else in the universe is not falsifiable. It's sort of like G-Man's answered prayer argument. You can't test it if prayers are answered yes, no, or later, all possible answers. If Trey claims it can't be falsified, we can just see it empirically as observers and must deduce from it that God is the first cause. Then his argument is not scientific.
That's fine.
We can move on from
Okay,
that.
well, the reason I'm dogging on this is because I'm trying to explain to Fox and to know that in fact my argument is indeed a scientific argument. That's the whole point.
It's not a scientific argument.
It is here we get to one of the most important aspects of his argument, his redefinition of the principle of causality. A statement is an analytic truth if it can be proved using only its words and nothing else, such as 2 plus 2 equals 4, or a bachelor is an unmarried man. As Trey calls it, a tautology. Any proposition that requires observation to prove it is not an analytic statement. Causality is inferred through observation and is therefore not analytic. It is synthetic. Now, I've seen Trey be very insistent about causality being analytic.
I don't know how many times I've explained this. Do you guys know that the principle of causality is analytic in nature?
It's not.
Okay. How do you define an effect?
Trey, do you know what an analytic proposition is? Do you know what analytic truth is?
Yes, it is. It's true by definition. It means it's a tautology. You're repeating yourself.
So,
The principle of causality is a tautology. Did you not know that?
Did you know that cause and effect is observed? It's learned, and it's possible to deny that if A happens, B does not.
But the principle itself is analytic in nature.
No, Trey, you're conflating two terms. You don't. Analytic truth is something specific, right? Okay, cause and effect is not analytic. It's synthetic truth.
No, it's not.
It is.
Define a cause then.
I'm not. Why do I have to define a cause? Why can you not show me?
Define it is to say that it gives rise to an effect. The only way you can define an effect is to say that it is that as a result of a cause. There's no other way to talk about it. Therefore, it's analytic. It's a tautology. It's necessarily true by definition.
I also noticed he'd been informed that it wasn't analytic in his Hangouts as well as in commentary. But just to be absolutely sure, I thought that I'd confirm it with Ozymandias Ramses. As you can see here in a Facebook message to me, he confirmed that indeed causation is inferred and it is not an analytic proposition. According to Ozzy, almost all philosophers agree that the principle of causation is not analytic. Only Trey has his own definition, which he expects you to accept as valid. That's ipse dixit. Since Trey proposes that the principle of cause and effect is analytic, he may also be aware that it cannot prove a synthetic statement, the fact of reality. We'll see why this is important as I conclude his argument. Trey will usually say to conclude his presentation, since there cannot be infinite regress of cause and effect, there must be something, somewhere, somehow, with the attribute of self-existence, which created contingency or the universe.
However, okay, so what you got to do is you extrapolate that on back and you say, everything that happens is going to be dependent on the thing that prior to that gave it something. So you go all the way back, you come to the point, it's like, well, wait a minute. There's got to be something, somewhere, somehow that has a capacity of self-existence. Otherwise, the law of non-contradiction explodes into nonsense and everything is chaos. You cannot posit an infinite regress of of effects, in essence. Therefore, you must posit something with the attribute of self-existence.
This is the classic argument from ignorance, also known as God of the gaps. But we can grant that it is an abductive argument, which is inference to best explanation. However, this means that, even if Trey believes he has the best explanation, by definition, there may be other possible explanations. He also needs to do this because, as I first explained, his conclusion will be begging the question if it can only be his God. This is where the misdefined principle of cause and effect comes into play. He entwines it with the law of non-contradiction, one of his stated presuppositions. By misdefining the principle of causality, cause and effect, as one and the same by his own definition, he then applies the law of non-contradiction to any objection to his conclusion, his prime mover self-existent God, to impose a false dichotomy. In other words, when one proposes any alternative to his God, it will always be violating the law of non-contradiction, or the law of identity. That is, if it has any attributes of contingency as he has defined them. It applies even when you say you don't know. as Matt Steele does
You
here.
say, why can't we take a position of agnosticism? You can take a position of agnosticism on 2 + 2 is 4. You can do whatever you want. But if you are a type of person that says that I want to inquire into this world and this existence in which I live, then you must ask that question because it's fundamental and it's analytic. In other words, it's not something that I think it's possible, but it's actually an analytic truth. If you hold the law of non-contradiction, then self-existence must be. And
Also, if you try to use his argument against him and assert your guess at first cause as self-existent, or agree with self-existence strictly for the sake of argument, he will claim you've conceded his argument, because anything with self-existence equates to theism, another false choice and ipse dixit assertion.
Please, Trey, you still have not answered.
It can't answer your question.
How do you go from there is a necessary self-existent entity to it being to the God of the Protestant canon?
okay, that's not the question. The question is, do you concede that argument? If you're conceding the argument, fine, we can move on.
Heartedly believe that there was a starting part to our universe, or starting point to our universe, i.e., the Big Bang. And even though I could get there with rainbow gravity, I would rather go to no boundary proposal, all of that type of thing, just because now I can have a start event, if you will, Big Bang, so I don't have to worry about all the problems that come into effect if we're living in an infinite universe.
Okay, well, if you're going to hold the Big Bang in your traditional sense, then you have to concede my point.
Which point would that be?
The necessity of self-existence for there to be contingency.
He is usually able to accomplish this by slipping in key terms via what's known as putting words in your mouth, a form of straw man, designating certain attributes the self-existent creator has, which he conveniently defines as necessary corollaries in order to misrepresent what his opponent says, and also, of course, to prevent further discussion. The terms are words like becoming, purpose, acted on or upon, and happen. They enable Trey to define his God as a being with volition, singularity, omnipotence, who is unchanging, along with some other special attributes.
See, this is the other thing I remember you doing, and this is something you're quite good at doing, is making statements of what people have said when they haven't actually said it. Doesn't change.
No, he does not change in such a way that he is acted upon to go through a metaphor.
So, how does something that is not changing act to cause something else to change?
You're saying that there cannot be volition with self-existence?
No, how? Why can't there be multiple entities? Why can't there be 300 pixies that created the universe?
Okay, well, so let's imagine, would the self-existent, whatever it is, have to be all-powerful?
No, it would just have to have the properties to create what currently exists.
Okay, so if
that's
it's
all it would
self-existent and it cannot be acted upon, if something else acted upon it, then that would acted upon it would be all-powerful, right?
No.
No.
Nope.
How so?
It would just have the ability to be acted on, and there could be something else that could act on it.
So therefore it's not self-existent, right?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I know why Fox brought you in.
Self-existence does not imply all-powerful.
Right.
Those are two separate
Well,
concepts.
sure it does. Of course
No,
it
it
does.
doesn't.
It's ridiculous.
No, it doesn't. Why would it?
You guys are unbelievable.
Well,
Think
no,
about it.
You need to explain, Trey. You make these.
I
you
am.
Make these,
I'm a-
you make, no, you make these conclusions.
There's a problem, Trey, is you don't offer syllogisms. You just throw out these non sequiturs
Oh my goodness.
without offering any syllogism. Show how it
I am
follows.
telling you.
It could be multiple entities. It could be some quantum realm. It could be the physical universe itself. It could be multiple things.
No, you just contradicted yourself.
I mean, you're just throwing out these. You're just adding on unnecessary attributes onto something that you have failed to show is required.
So something else could act upon self-existence.
Another
It could,
self-existent
or-
being. Good, yeah, why not?
So,
Then it's contingent, isn't it? It's dependent on that which brings
no,
the
see,
act.
now you're saying
Something is acting upon it then
Well,
that
what's
which
negative
acts
in it?
upon it
Who said something? Who said anything's acting upon it?
it changes. If it changes,
It doesn't even have to. It doesn't even need to change, and it could internally change.
Yeah.
For it to change,
internally change.
for something to change, something externally doesn't have to act on it for it to change.
Sure it does.
No, it
Everything
doesn't.
that changes is responding to something that acts upon it, right?
No.
If I move
Wrong.
my
Give me an
hand
example, Floyd. Give me an example.
Move my hand here, Trey.
A metamorphosis.
Okay, what is happening in a metamorphosis? The environment is acting upon it?
No, internal changes within itself.
Oh, so something is self-existent and contingent within itself. You're
Trey,
violating the law of identity.
How does something
No, it
It's
doesn't.
the effect that you're talking about, potentiality.
what has that got to do with what I've just said?
And it has everything to do with definitional. You're promoting potentiality without actuality. It's not possible.
These attributes also raise some interesting dilemmas for Trey, which he tries to special plead out of via the necessary corollary route, but I want to make this as basic as possible, so I won't discuss them all here. I might include a post on these in my blog. So, how do those who Trey often approaches for debates respond to him after understanding what I've just presented here? I would say by pointing out his fallacy problems and not granting his definitions. His argument is not scientific, his definition of the principle of cause and effect is not correct, and his misuse of the law of non-contradiction appears to be set into place for the purpose of preventing objections to his argument. He must also cite his outside sources for the principle of the cause and effect and how the law of non-contradiction connects, and explain why he does not follow conventional commonly accepted definitions of terms. It must be pointed out that his necessary attributes are smuggled in via straw men, are special pleadings, and are used with the law of non-contradiction to enforce a false dichotomy of his premise and his conclusion, to which he ipse dixits expects you to accept as necessary, when the truth is you are not bound to it. Until he concedes this, that he has designed his argument to not permit other possible explanations, he cannot be taken seriously, and the discussions cannot go any further. I did not address another crucial part of the argument, that is, how does one get from this self-existent being to the God of the Protestant canon? Trey has rarely ever gotten this far in his discussions, but this is enough to show his argument has too many weaknesses up front to even get to that point. I'd like to analogize Trey's argument in terms of presuppositionalism. The current presuppositionalists claim that the Christian worldview is the only rational one because of the impossibility of the contrary. If Trey would apply his method to the presuppositional argument, he would claim that all their worldviews devolve into nonsense and chaos, sort of like cause and effect, and that the law of non-contradiction is inextricably linked to the impossibility of any contrary worldview to his version of Christianity. Therefore, anything you posit as an alternative worldview violates the law of non-contradiction, and he would expect you to accept this as valid. This could be the future of presuppositional apologetics, so maybe Trey's argument has some hope after all. My blog includes most of what was described in this video in a chart like I did on presuppositionalism in 2013. It will be linked below. Thanks for watching, and peace out.